Welcome to Techno Forensics. I'm glad to see you guys here this morning. I'm going to jump right in. I am Ellington. I'm a certified forensic examiner with Ellington Digital Forensics. We're located in Raleigh, North Carolina, but we work all over the place doing digital investigations, civil, criminal, corporate, stuff like that. And I have a special guest with me this morning, my mother, who is this is Roxanne Ellington. She's a...
You can't tell.
She keeps running away from me and they keep bringing me back. But she's a licensed clinical addiction specialist and she works with the Duke Adolescent Addictions Program. And for the past 27 years, she's been working with adolescent addiction and adolescent addiction treatment. And so what we're going to talk to you about today, we're going to kind of do a 1-2 punch of my perspective and some information involving investigations with adolescents and the adolescent mind. And then Roxanne's going to talk some about the actual psychology of it and the physiology of it. And I'm glad to see you guys here this morning. I'm assuming if you're here, you probably do have investigations that you work with that involve adolescents. What do we got? Social working agencies, different people like that? Is everybody kind of shaking their head? Okay, cool. Well, that was what I was going to say. The good news about the information that we're going to talk about is even if you're not directly involved in a role where there's investigations involving adolescents, you are probably a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, or at worst, you have a whole bunch of young people that you work with that you're trying to figure them out. And hopefully this might put us a little bit of a step closer to it. So we're going to run through a couple things. So when we talk about investigations involving adolescents, we're going to talk about investigative challenges, okay? And again, talking at first from somewhat of the digital side. Technology types and complexity, which we'll talk more about that, but obviously your adolescents are going to be a lot more skilled, they're going to be a lot more apt to use a variety of technology. Lingo and language, of course everybody's already shaking their head. Anybody that knows anything about teenagers of the next generation knows that they have their own language. Access to the suspect or victim, which we'll talk about. Influence of a suspect. And then finally, ramifications and impact on your victim or suspect when you're talking about investigating these kind of crimes. All right, so when we talk about technology types and complexity, what we're talking about is obviously the first thing. Kids today are going to be more technologically savvy than most of your adults that you're going to be investigating. I mean, I've had parents tell me, how can they expect to put controls on or monitor their children's technology use when the kids know it so much better than they do? You know, we've got a bunch of what we call baby Bill Gates out there. You'll find that adolescents tend to communicate over a wide variety of devices and platforms. You know, adults, we tend to be more set in our ways. We tend to, you know, you might have your iPhone, you might have your tablet or something like that. What you're going to find, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is that they tend to communicate across a variety of platforms, a variety of software, a variety of types. And you need to take that into account when you're doing your investigation and when you're collecting your information, because you don't want to just get these disparate pieces of the puzzle, and you may have to, again, collect more information than you normally would. They're more likely to upgrade, swap devices. They tend to be early adopters. If you're going to be investigating adolescents, you're going to have to stay on the cutting edge, because if there's something new and cool, they've probably got it. Plus, anybody who's got a teenager knows what happens. They go to school, things get stolen, things get lost, things get traded. So again, if you're conducting an investigation with an adult, maybe you subpoena an adult's phone and you look at it, and you may have 2 to 3 years of activity on one phone, okay? With a teenager, you may get their phone and be shocked to find out there's only like 3 months of data on here. Well, what happened? Well, the new phone came out, and so, you know, mom and dad bought me the new phone, and I got rid of the old phone. That's an important problem, so you need to just keep that in your head, too, when we're talking about it. Okay, more focused on security and specialized apps. From an investigative and computer nerd standpoint, nothing is more frustrating than somebody who uses encryption just because it's cool. Not because they have anything to hide or they're, you know, dealing drugs or they're some international terrorist. They just think it's cool. Okay. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this too, but one of the problems with dealing with adolescents is they make it difficult on you just because it's cool. Okay. Very common problem. So, under the technology types and complexity, one of the things I like to talk about, and one I think is the most overlooked source of data. I mean, and again, I know we've got a bunch of professionals here. You guys are used to looking at phones, tablets, computers, that kind of stuff. But the video game platforms is kind of one of the really big deals that a lot of people overlook. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about that. Obviously, most of the stuff you may even have in your own home. You know, Xboxes, PlayStations, Wiis. There's the handheld gaming devices like the PlayStation Vita, things like the DS. Now, what do all these things have in common? Well, they connect to the internet. They have web browsers. Many of them have cameras. They have audio, video capability. So in essence, they're all cell phones. You know, there are parents out there who would never give their child a cell phone, right? But they've got an Xbox with a headset and a camera on. Case study, we had an investigation several years ago where there was a child who was court-ordered to only have supervised communication with the father. I mean, for very good reasons, but it was like 1 hour a week with a counselor on the phone was the only time this child was allowed to communicate with the father. And the kid was still having all kinds of problems, still blowing out. And they couldn't figure out why until we started investigating. Well, the kid had an Xbox, and he would have his headset, and he would be playing video games. He was spending 3 to 4 hours a night talking to the dad and communicating with the dad and under the influence of the dad. And we didn't figure that out until we started conducting an investigation. So when you're looking at these devices, a couple of things to keep in mind. Xboxes are basically Windows computers. They have Windows-type hard drives. You can copy them like a regular hard drive. Many of the investigative tools that we all use that you'll see talked about here, the IEF, the magnet forensic stuff, FTK, all those kind of programs, InCase, Belkacol, those will all conduct your regular investigations on Xbox hard drives. So, like I said, they're not encrypted. It's just like having a Windows hard drive. You can scan for browser-type history, game history, things like that. PlayStations are a little bit more of a problem. PlayStations are by default encrypted, and it's not something that you can just decrypt by having somebody's password. It's kind of a special kind of encryption that we could do a whole presentation on that. But there are protocols for investigating a PlayStation. You can take the hard drive out of a PlayStation. Even though it's encrypted, you can image it, make a preservation copy of it. And there's some really good stuff on the internet. So if this ever comes up, just remember Google how to investigate a PlayStation. But you can hook the drive back up with a write blocker to the original PlayStation, isolate it from the internet, and then you can still at least get some responsive data. Web histories, galleries, there's a lot of information that you can still pull off the PlayStation doing it that way, but the drive itself is encrypted. So, but just, there's information there, and there are ways to do it. This main thing is I want you to remember that. Also, most of these gaming platforms have associated online identities, associated online accounts. Like, for example, Xbox has a Xbox Live, so you can actually subpoena that information. If you have the person's username and password, you can actually log in and pull down a lot of information, like the games they play, how much they play, who they're communicating with, who their peer groups are. And when we talked about, and we'll talk about how they communicate across a lot of platforms, there may be a lot of responsive communications taking place over gaming platforms. Again, PlayStation has the PlayStation Network. That's stuff that you can subpoena as well. Everybody with me? I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I really want to hear what she's got to say, so I want to get through my part really quick. Anyway, and when we talk about...
As a mother, isn't that a wonderful thing?
I know, right? It took me a long time to get to that point.
Finally.
So when we talk about that, so those are your typical gaming consoles, but I also want to talk about for a second the actual PC or computer-based gaming, because that's also a really good source of information. Now, obviously, if people are playing PC games, you're going to get a lot of artifacts and a lot of information from, again, using your standard tools, your IEFs, your Belkasoffs, your FTK, InCase, stuff like that. But they also have online storage. And for people who don't know, for example, Steam, that's probably one of the best known. Steam is a mechanism where you can go online and buy your games from this online store, and they will download them to your computer, but you still sort of have to log into the online store to play your games. You don't have the actual physical discs anymore, and that's going to be an interesting point we're going to talk about in a minute too. But the great thing about that is Steam keeps track of the games you own, how much you play the games, There are chat clients and communication clients and stuff like that. So again, all of these, Social Club, Rockstar Social Club, you're probably familiar with Grand Theft Auto. That's a big deal. They store a lot of information. EA Games is a lot of the sports games for Windows Live. So just keep in mind that if you're looking for responsive information, if you're looking for how much time somebody's spending playing games, doing things like that, who they're communicating with, some of their peers, a lot of this information can be accessed just with their credentials, but then other information can be accessed via subpoena. And again, the usual subpoena type stuff like IP addresses, where they were, when they were, who they were communicating, where the people they were communicating were at. You with me? Okay, cool. All right, so when we talk about being more focused on specialized apps, you know, Snapchat, that's supposed to be the big deal, but Snapchat is so yesterday. There are hundreds of apps that do the same thing, and the level of complexity with those apps has just gotten crazy. I mean, you know, we know about, you know, the WhatsApp, the Kick Messenger. There's a new one now called Wicker, which does some pretty impressive endpoint-to-endpoint encryption. And you know, you're pretty much lost as far as finding artifacts of communications go. Some of these still have logs though. Like for example, Snapchat. You may not be able to find what they were sending back and forth, but you may be able to recover logs of what they're talking about. And the reason why I bring this up is because you can't just rely on your traditional tools to find this application data for you. And I know last year, anybody that was at the conference, that was the big buzzword, app data, that's what everybody talked about last year. I know they're gonna be talking about it a lot this year. What's important is just understanding that there's no tool out there that's gonna be able to find this data for you. You're gonna have to go digging for it. Certain tools like IF, Magnet Forensics, does a dynamic app finder where it scans through and it looks for things almost like a virus scan where it doesn't know it's a virus, but it looks like something that might be an app and it draws your attention to it. So it may just be that you just have to go manually through lists of installed apps. You have to go manually through any SQLite databases you find and stuff like that, but that's where it's at. And they come out with new ones every day. So again, that's where the data is. And again, when we talk about communicating across different platforms, you may see that adolescents will have one messenger or one communication method that they use with one peer group, and another communication method that they use with another peer group, and another communication method. An adult would never do that. You know, we have our text message, we have our messenger, that's it. You may find that, again, they're communicating in a lot of different ways across different peer groups. Still have logs like we talked about. You still may be able to subpoena some information. There are so many tiny fly-by-night little companies and programmers and developers releasing apps. Most of them are overseas. It can be impossible to subpoena server-side data, and in most cases there may be no server-side data. Like the Wicker app we talked about, they make it perfectly clear they don't keep anything at all anyway. And again, we talked about how application data was last year's buzzword. I think the buzzword you're going to hear in this conference is going to be about getting cloud data, accessing cloud data. A lot of people are going to be talking about that. I know Cellbrite is talking about that a lot, some of the other companies. If you're not using, Elcomsoft's got a little program. It's their phone breaker program, but it also downloads iCloud data. If you don't have that in your toolbox, you should. It's an amazing program that allows you to download somebody's entire iCloud account, and then you can process the normal tools. You can download an iCloud account and then run it through Cellbrite, run it through Elcomsoft or IEF or FTK. But again, that's going to be the big thing. Tools that allow you to easily pull down the Steam data, pull down all the other stuff. So cloud data is the next big thing. Any questions? Okay, cool. All right. The lingo and the language. Well, obviously this is a big one. Everybody, like we said, knows that adolescents have their own language. We used to tell parents, you need to know the difference between LOL and IRL. And without looking at the chart, y'all guys know what IRL is? In real life? Okay. Big difference when an adolescent is talking about that. But here's the really critical part of them having their own language. It's not just that they have their own language, and you might want to be an expert in the lingo of teens. The problem is that this slang can vary. Age, sex, socioeconomic level, race, all these different factors can play into the type of language and the lingo that they use. And again, you may find that certain cliques and certain peer groups affect the way the adolescent uses. Now, again, as adults, we pretty much probably have one speaking style that we would adopt, and maybe with our bros we talk a different way or something like that. But we kind of stay within that certain comfort zone. But you may find, you may honestly feel like you're investigating a whole bunch of different people because of the way the language and the tone and all that stuff, the mannerisms, change from one communication group to the other, and then like we said, across these different levels. And then we also joke about this in our office a lot, how you can't just rely on keyword searches because anything can be slang for sex or drugs. And the joke in our office is, hey, you want some beer and pizza? Yeah, how much do you want? Well, how about bringing you a gram of pizza and a nickel bag of beer? That's the kind of conversations that we get. So again, relying on just keyword searches can sometimes obviously be ineffective. You're going to have to look at everything and all the pieces and the context of all the pieces. Okay? All right, so here's where it really gets interesting. Access to your suspect or victim when you're talking about an adolescent investigation, and I can see already people shaking their heads. If you want to have a communication with an adolescent as a suspect, as a witness, as a victim, you may have hurdles placed on it. Guardian ad litem's, counselors, parents. You may have parents who do not want to cooperate with you even if their child is a victim or a witness. Collecting online data. I know this group is probably familiar with what we call the COPA Act, the Children's Online Privacy Act. If you're not, simply put, this is a federal law from a few years back that places restrictions on internet providers about putting harmful material in front of anybody under the age of 13. There's lots of civil penalties and liability. This is why if you go to Gmail or Facebook or any of Twitter, it always says you must be 13 years or older to have a Gmail account, to have a Facebook account. And the reason is that's to protect the site operator from liability. If a 12-year-old's on Steam and somebody uses harmful language, that's supposed to protect the site operator because that violates their term of service. You shouldn't have an account anyway. Well, the problem can come in with the site operators when you go to subpoena the information from them and they realize you're conducting an investigation with a 10-year-old who has a Gmail account. They may be a little antsy. Well, they shouldn't have had a Gmail account anyway, but all of a sudden, wait a minute, we might be facing some liability here, because there was a 10-year-old using Gmail to get in trouble. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And here's the oh my gosh, I didn't think about this until you just said it moment, is that some of the data may require extra handling, may be considered contraband. Okay, let's say you have an adult crime, a robbery or just some kind of adult crime, and one of your witnesses might be an adolescent. So you image that adolescent's phone to get information regarding this completely adult, unrelated crime, and the kid's been sexting. Okay, all of a sudden, you've got to take special steps to handle this evidence because you're dealing with what could potentially be contraband, and again, situational contraband, because it's a contraband, but you have to keep that in mind, and that can be a problem. That can be another one of the hurdles that you have to face is when I open this can of worms of gathering this data, am I all of a sudden going to have to place special restrictions on it, even though I'm not normally an exploitation investigator? But all of a sudden, I'm kind of thrown into that just because suspect, victim, or witness is one of these people. Influence of the suspect. And I know if there's a lot of, like I said, counselors, investigators out there will appreciate this. You may have a victim who doesn't believe they're a victim and will not participate in your investigation, will give false testimony, will destroy evidence. You don't often have a case where you have an adult victim who you are trying to assist, who's going to destroy evidence to keep you from assisting them. So again, the sort of sometimes common sense rules may not apply when you're dealing with underage victim, witness, suspect. You may have to view them as adversarial when you're trying to go take the steps to preserve the information, the data that they have. Again, they may be a victim, but they'll lie to you. you have to take that into account. Again, a very common thing. You may have a victim who is under a protective order so that the suspect can't communicate with them, but yet your victim is still communicating with the suspect and maybe even telling the suspect about what's going on with the investigation and sabotaging the investigation. So again, that's another one of those things you have to take into account. Ramifications or impact, another thing just to kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're investigating adolescents. Unintended consequences. You may have somebody who is a victim and you start to conduct an investigation, and just because you are conducting an investigation, they may face penalties. They might get kicked out of school for being a victim. You know, and I think y'all know we're talking about that. That can be a very common thing. Investigations may cascade or blow up. You may be conducting a drug investigation, or you may be conducting an investigation where there was some sexting going on, and some kid had pictures of another kid, and then all of a sudden, instead of one victim and one suspect, you've got 10 victims and 20 suspects because somebody hit send all, and now all of a sudden your investigation has cascaded. So you have to keep that in mind, and that's a ramification. The crime may not be the crime. We had a recent case where 26-year-old guy in a relationship with a 16 and turning 17-year-old girl, sexual relationship. Everybody was losing their mind about that, of course, but that wasn't necessarily illegal. But that was what everybody thought should be investigated. But what turned out to be the illegal things was, of course, if there was sexting going on. So, of course, they could engage in sexual relationship. They couldn't, send pictures of it back and forth. But the other interesting thing, and where we kind of were able to put the heat on this guy, is picture your typical teen relationship. And there's a lot of drama and a lot of angst and a lot of, well, I can't believe you were talking to that guy and you're a slut because you talked to that guy. Well, all of a sudden, we've got him for cyberbullying. It's his girlfriend, but the typical negative relationship. So again, what you may think is a crime may not be a crime, but maybe you can find other crimes. Okay, everybody's with me on that. All right. And then here's another thing you have to be really careful about too. A lot of states have pretty strong cyberbullying laws when it relates to adults communicating with underage people. A lot of this came out of the old Texas cheerleader case, where the mother of one cheerleader was harassing the other cheerleader on Facebook, and the other cheerleader committed suicide and all this kind of stuff. So you may have a situation, let's say you've got one parent and their kid is getting bullied by another kid at school, and so you send them an email and say, hey, you need to leave my kid alone. Well, all of a sudden, that's cyberbullying this parent who's injected himself into this, or even, a person who's trying to help, and all of a sudden they're violating cyberbullying laws for communicating with somebody under the age of 18, which brings me back to the larger picture. As an investigator, sometimes you have to be very careful with your investigations and your communications, making sure you're going through the right steps and stuff like that. So, everybody with me? Any questions? I knew I threw a whole bunch of stuff at you. The whole idea is just at least getting you to appreciate that there are differences, and going forward you can kind of focus on the differences. So here's the really cool stuff. Let's talk about the teenage brain, and I have obviously Roxanne Ellington here with me, and this is the big deal. This is the new interesting stuff, and if you haven't started hearing a lot about this stuff, you will. But Roxanne, why don't you come out here and jump into it? I know you have your quote. I love this picture too, by the way, because it talks about, and of course, love, which I don't think quite love is the word that we would put in using up this much of a teenager's brain. I think there's something else. But I like the what's on Facebook part and everything like that. Of course, one last note about Facebook. Of course, the funny thing is that Facebook is so yesterday. Teenagers don't use Facebook anymore because grandma's on Facebook. So they have to post all their stuff on other places and stuff like that. But I will let Roxanne.
Let me see, when you were a kid.
Yes. And memory for chores and homework. You may have teenagers. God bless you all. They'll be okay if you let them live. It's kind of questionable. One of the things that's happened in the last, I've been doing this for over 30 years, working with adolescents. And one of the things that's happened in the last 10 years is there's been an explosion in looking at neurobiology. And in the last 18 months, there's been a zillion books and studies that are coming out. And a lot of what they're doing that doesn't make sense, makes sense when you start looking at the neurobiology of what's going on. And they are adapting so quickly to whatever's new and whatever's coming out. So you can't hardly, as a parent, keep up with them. And as an investigator, it's like, they were there, no, they're here, they're doing this, what's new? I have a young lady, and we're not going to get into cases, but I have a young lady who's 17 and wants a phone, but because her grandmother cannot afford the latest phone, she doesn't want to have any phone. If she can't have the iPhone 6, forget it, because then she's not up with everybody else. Two colleagues of mine wrote a book called What Are They Thinking? And Scott Schwartzwelder is a psychologist at Duke University Medical Center. Aaron White was at Duke. He is now at the National Institute of Health. And I think this kind of sums it up. It's a quote from Nicholas Carr in his book, The Shallows. What we are experiencing is, in a metaphorical sense, a reversal of the early trajectory of civilization. We are evolving from being cultivators of personal, we're evolving from being cultivators of personal knowledge to being hunters and gatherers in the electronic data forest. So kids spend so much time here.
Oh, sorry.
The Mind Change came out in 2015. Susan Greenfield is a neuroscientist who read this. And making a presentation to the House of Lords, she said that the human brain adapts to the environment, and the environment is changing in an unprecedented way. So the brain must also be changing in an unprecedented way. Our kids are adapters. They change so quickly with the technology. Derek was talking about, how we are coming into it, a lot of us, as immigrants and not as natives. And so we're looking at brains on technology. I love this. This is the Gutenberg revolution of our century. What the printing press did for information is what computers and the internet and all of the technology is doing now. Our children are so far ahead of us. My granddaughter at 3 was sitting at a computer going, oh, this little baby seat, it's so cute. She had no qualms about playing with computers. She goes, she will say, don't worry, Grandma, I can do that. And she can. So brain develops by interacting with our environment. Plasticity, plasticity, plasticity. What that means is everything we think, everything we do, everything that happens around us, everything we watch, it changes our brain. And plasticity means the ability for the brain to mold and be different. And as an adolescent, the impact of everything that they do is so great, and it can be lifelong. So in the new digital environment, it changes the way their brains are developing. And they're digital natives, not digital immigrants. Plasticity was first, you switched on me.
I keep switching your slides on you, I'm sorry.
Okay. And it just means to be molded. And that came before plastic. So plasticity means just to be molded. Okay. There's digital natives and digital immigrants. And digital natives are the kids like my granddaughter who are growing up in the culture. They get information so quickly from multiple sources. They're multitasking and parallel processing. Digital immigrants are us, a lot of us. And also there's a group that's in the middle. I'm working with some 24-year-olds who are kind of in the middle of that. They didn't grow up from babyhood with these technology. So they're kind of on the cusp of learning some of it. Digital immigrants like control resources of limited information. We don't want to be going like this all the time, bouncing back and forth. Multitasking and parallel processing. These kids have so many things going on. We like single focus tasks. Let me do this and let me do this. They've got all these different things running at the same time. I have an intensive outpatient program. And if I say something that one of the kids isn't sure or they want to disagree with, they kind of pull out their phone and have it kind of where they think don't know what they're doing. Because they're wanting to see if what I'm saying is true, and they're going to find information that proves I'm wrong. Okay? So they want the picture, sounds, and video. They don't want to have to read it. They want you to feed it to them really quickly. Others of us, we want to look at the text. We want to be able to read it. We want to be able to comprehend it. Hyperlink sources, they keep telling every day they come in with some, oh, I got this off this, and I was looking at this website, and this is the information, this is the latest research, and I'm going, oh. Some of us, we want that time to, okay, I've got the information. I was listening to this book on tape while I was driving, and I would stop after a few minutes and kind of let it, sink into my brain because it's just so much to know, and they just kind of breeze through it. Interacting in real time. They want everything now. Not tomorrow, not a few minutes from now, but now. We like private introspection. Using greater content. I tell you what, these kids, like Derek said, they like to do things like encryption because it's cool. And just because they can. They like user-generated content. They want it from somebody else. They want it from you or from their friends. Let's see what else. They're more content. We like things to be presented linearly and logically and sequentially. Just give it. I'll sort it out maybe.
One of the things we were talking about earlier, and a part of the whole digital immigrants, a practical repercussion of this. Kids today, and this generation, when we talk about these adolescents, like Roxanne said, this can't apply to people all the way up into their 30s. They can have that adolescent mindset. So when we're talking about adolescents, you still may run into these things dealing with 20-year-olds and stuff like that. This is a generation who is so used to Netflix, okay, streaming movies, streaming music, not actually having physical, tangible copies of things. They don't go and buy movies. They stream them maybe. They don't go buy a game and hold it in their hands. Okay, so the ramifications of that, and there's some really good studies coming out by economists, these people aren't buying things. They're not buying houses. They're not buying cars the same way we did. We had a different sense of ownership, okay? And the American dream is you buy a house, and then you spend lots of money to fill it with things. You buy a car, and then you buy another car, and you buy another car. Well, what's happening is because of the rewiring of their brains, they don't have that same sense of possession as identity that the older generations did, and that's actually affecting the economy. So it's making a negative impact on the economy.
One of the ways we were talking about the fact that vinyl records are coming back. I have boxes of vinyl records. That may be my retirement income. But kids, they don't have the desire to hold on to those things. They don't have meaning for them anymore. And so it's very different. I'm a book person, but you talk to some of the kids that I work with, and you say anything about books. Well, if they don't read it really quickly, electronically, forget it. Just don't do that.
And again, what we were talking about is that the stuff that we're talking about is not just psychology. There's actual physical changes that can be documented in their brains. And you were talking about a program where it actually shows the kids the brain scans.
We, as a substance abuse counselor, we send kids to different programs, and I was up in the mountains of North Carolina Thursday and Friday, and there's a wilderness program called Sioux of the Carolinas. And one of the things that they do is they do neurofeedback. They show the kids what's going on in their brain and are able to say, you are using cocaine, this is why this part of your brain looks like this. You've been smoking a lot of weed. Here's where in your brain this is being impacted. And one of the kids that I've been working with who had used a lot of cocaine said, maybe it's a good idea if I don't do this because I can see it. We can tell him, but he can see it, and he believes that more than he believes what we have to say. So the neuroscience is really going to give us an ability to say what's going on up there, what's working and what's not working. Technology changes time and distance. You get into, I'm going to date myself. I was talking earlier this morning. The first time Derek set me down in front of a computer, I lost 2 hours playing Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Okay? And for you young folks who don't know what that is, we'll explain later.
Google it.
Yeah, Google it. I got up going, I can't do this. Where'd those 2 hours go? And so these kids get so involved in technology that time and distance just has no meaning. I'll have parents who say, well, they've been playing games for the last 5 hours. How can they do that? And I'm like, how could they not? They get on it, they start playing. They also, like Derek said, don't understand how much interaction is going on with other kids. So this is social time for them. It's not like I'm just...
Are there any positives associated with technology? And if
Absolutely.
not, is there a limit
Absolutely.
on a daily time frame that
All right.
kids should use technology?
Absolutely. And a lot of these books will talk about that. They tell you what technology can do, but they can also tell you the benefits. If you have a kid with social anxiety, being able to build a relationship over the internet with someone can help them build up their self-confidence and their self-esteem.
Even for gaming, is there an amount of time during the day, maybe limited to an hour, that doesn't result in all of the negative things, rewiring and everything?
It's about balance. It's all about balance. If I'm going to spend time gaming, if it's violent games, that's one thing. That can leave some lasting effects on who I am and how I think, and can desensitize me some. If it's skill building games, if it's games where I'm interacting with other people, that may be fun and that may help me have a better sense of self. So technology's not all bad. It's really good, but we have to know how to balance it.
What percentage do you think is positive and what percent is negative? I'm thinking 10 positive and 90% negative from what I'm seeing with crime and...
Let me address that in a little bit of what you were saying, because one of the things that happens a lot in our investigation is we'll have somebody who will say, how much time do they spend playing video games? And the problem is they want you to boil that down to a number, 3 hours a day. Okay, whatever. And they want to be able to judge that number, like somehow that's good or bad. 3 hours a day maybe playing Grand Theft Auto, 3 hours a day playing Minecraft. 3 hours a day playing Minecraft for a kid who otherwise is not one you can engage in something constructive. And as Roxanne was talking about, the ability to create these social connections can be very important. And again, what we're really talking about is not necessarily that those connections are negative, but that we have to recognize them. And part of what you were talking about too is this, they're already rewired. One of the things we talk about, and where you say that it changes your default state, we grew up and our default state was disconnected. If you got a phone call from somebody, that was great. If you got a letter from somebody, that was pretty cool. Your default at-rest position was you were by yourself. Okay. These kids today are always connected. They're checking their cell phone before they get out of bed. They feel like they have these like tentacles into the world. Okay. And part of what we want to stress here is that you have to be really careful when you're addressing this technology, because you can't just cut it off. It's different for us than it is for them. Of course, I say it's different, but one of the questions I'll ask is how far away from your house would you have to be before you would turn around and go back and get your cell phone? You know, we still have that sense of connection. But again, they are wired to always be connected, and that's part of, like I said, what we want to stress is there's even treatment programs, and some of the programs my mother works with, when they're dealing with other types of addiction, they have to recognize the technology addiction as being a component of that, and then they have to be really careful how they step that down. I mean, if you want to talk about like a methadone program for cell phones, it's almost the same kind of thing where you have to understand, and so what will happen is you'll have kids who, you know, maybe they are, you know, drug problems, sexual problems, things like that, that you think that the technology is a component of, but you can't just do the knee-jerk reaction is to completely cut them off for technology. You know, you take your kid's cell phone away and they commit suicide, or they run away, or they somehow otherwise blow out, and you're like, I can't understand why this kid freaked out just because we took their cell phone away. And that's because we don't see it the way they do. And that's, again, what we're trying to stress, is that they are hardwired to have that connection to the world. And one of the things that Roxanne sees with a lot of kids she works with is that they don't know how necessarily to interact directly with people. You know, they can sit here, I got two of my work associates with me, and we were talking about how even us have so many people that we can have all these long conversations with on Facebook and talking about politics and life and all this kind of stuff, and then we run into them in public and it's like, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, you know. And kids are way worse than that because of they have been taught to communicate, you know, in an emoticon instant gratification world.
Okay. So we're in the cafeteria and you're over there. I don't get up and walk over to you and look you in the face and say, hey, do you want to go out and have a pizza after school? I'll text, you'll text me back, you know, and you say, no, I can't go today. I don't know whether it's you really don't want to go because of something. I can't see those facial cues. When the kids go to the wilderness programs, of course, there's no phones, there's no technology at all. They don't, the only thing they can do is write letters. A lot of them don't have a clue what to write. They have to learn, like, hi, Mom and Dad, hope you were fine. Because they just don't have that skill. And so, yes, there's some really, really positive things about technology, and there's some things that our kids are missing because of it. The other thing is, neuroscience-wise, if us, have a cell phone in our pocket, even if it's on vibrate, if it vibrates, there's a little dopamine spike in the brain. Oh, somebody wants me, something's going on, you know. If I have a kid in my office and my phone rings and I don't pick it up, they're like, you need to go answer that. I'm like, no, this is your time. No, you need to go answer that. Somebody wants you. And I'm like, they'll leave me a message. No.
Is there such a thing? I've had this phenomenon, you know, like phantom sensation, phantom vibrate, and I realize my phone isn't on me, it's on over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like this expectation.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's almost a different expectation. There was actually a quote in a little comedy show on Netflix where somebody was talking to this woman about whether she was an orphan or not. And she said, I'm not an orphan, but I think my parents are dead every time my phone rings after 10. Remember that feeling? Like but nowadays, it's like she said, it's that dopamine, it's that sense of connection. And for a lot of them, if the phone's not ringing, that means everything's okay. It's like your security blanket.
Right. I had one young man who had to sleep with his phone, and we were like, why? Nobody's going to be calling you after whatever time. He said, well, I just need to know that it's here, just in case.
So again, Roxanne talked about a couple resources. There's a bunch of really good books out there. These are two. And The Teenage Brain is a very good read. It's also the audiobook is also really good. It's also one of those ones, like she said, though, is like it'll be like little mind-blowing moments where you actually have to stop and really think about, you know, what she's telling you. But a lot of what we've been talking about here, you'll find there.
Yeah, Frances Jensen is a neuroscientist, and she did research on baby brains looking for medical cures for epilepsy and drugs. And as a single mom, when her two boys got to be teenagers, and I said this about my stepson, not my son, that when my stepson was 11, he went in his room and somebody sucked his brains out. And he walked out the door the next day, and I didn't know who that kid was. And that's what Dr. Jensen was saying is, her older son walked in and she's like, where did this child come from? And so she wanted to find out. So this covers a lot of information. It's really good information. It's an easy read. Every parent ought to read it. Anyone who works with teenagers, and all of us do, needs to read it. The other thing is, it helped me realize why I did some of the things I did as a teenager. The neurobiology started to make sense. Mind Change, I just found this week, it also came out. It also came out in 2015, another neuroscientist from the UK. Excellent, excellent book.
So just kind of tie this all together and kind of our reason why we're here to talk about this. Again, challenges of investigations involving adolescents. We talk about their use of technology, the different types of complexity, the fact that they have their own language, and they may have different languages for different peer groups. Okay, and also the lingo may vary across socioeconomic, race, sex, gender, things like that. All right, we talk about the problems with access to your suspect, and the fact that your suspect or victim, your victim may not think they're a victim. We talk about the influence of the suspect. In adolescent investigations, more than anywhere else you're going to see, a perpetrator may still have an undue influence over your victim. We talk about the ramifications and stuff you have to consider. We know now that teenage brains are simply different, and this is kind of the thesis statement here. When you undertake to investigate, and you're investigating your suspect, you're investigating your crime, keep in your mind, am I dealing with somebody who is this digital native, or are they a digital immigrant? How does that impact my investigation? How does it impact how I'm going to collect data? And how is that going to help me to process what I'm seeing? Okay? Because again, you look at a normal investigation, you may expect a very linear approach to the thinking. Let's talk about planning a crime. You know, you plan the crime, you do the crime, you talk about the crime afterward. And, you know, you may see the data just all mixed up and intermingled when you're talking about the way the digital native's mind works. We also want to stress that we joke about technology addiction, but it is a real thing. It is a part of who they are. It is how their brains are wired. Again, special care has to be taken as parents, as investigators, when you remove the electronic means of communication, because they may not know how to communicate any other way. And then you may exacerbate the problems.
The other thing I want to add is, if their phones and ways to communicate are taken away from them, their friends will provide a phone, will provide them a way to access, because that's not right. You have to have a phone.
And I'm laughing because we had one just recently. You know, you got a 17-year-old girl who's got a 26-year-old boyfriend, and the parents think that taking her cell phone away is going to solve the problem. Trust me, the 26-year-old boyfriend is perfectly capable of buying an iPhone and giving it to the girl. So a lot of times we tell people that your kid's technology can sometimes be like that spy in World War II that gives you the really good information. But if you act on the information, sometimes you lose the spy, so it can kind of be the trade-off. I'd rather you have a cell phone that I know what you're doing than take your cell phone away and then I have no way to catch up on you. But I think we're doing great with time. Any questions? By all means, please.
Oh, I just had a thought, because I could see a lot of the things that you're talking about that relates directly back to, and another presentation you guys could do probably is on managing 20-year-olds. Yes, texting and multitasking and just trying to...
Well, we do a lot of, our digital friends, we do a lot of family law cases. And a lot of the cases involve custody or dealing with kids who are having problems. Is how we have such a sense of urgency and a connection to it. One of the things that I do a presentation for lawyers on how technology screws up custody agreements and how lawyers will draft these really great custody agreements, but they don't take into account the technology. Like, for example, mom doesn't want the kid to have a cell phone, dad does. one parent doesn't think you should be allowed to play violently again. You know, so you need to take those into account. But the point being is that we see it. You know, if I feel strongly about kids and appropriate use of technology and making sure you understand how to use technology, it's usually because I'm the one that has to tell you your 12-year-old is doing drugs and is sexually active. You know, and I don't like doing that. But we're the ones that usually are on the forefront of investigating that information. And unfortunately, sometimes the parents don't quite have that same connect. One of the common things that happen to us, we'll have, let's say we've got two parents separated, the kid goes back and forth, and they'll come to us and say, the child has been looking at pornography. Can you tell us whether they were looking at pornography at the mom's house or they were looking at pornography at the dad's house? And I'm like, I think you guys are kind of missing the operative point here. But again, that's a lot of times that's how they get us involved, is because, well, hold on, there's some behavior here. How can I use that against the other parent? I think you're missing the larger picture. Yes, sir.
So we have a case right now with a sexual assault and drug dealing, and the victim's phone should have a lot of information on it, but she's the poorer of the parties and has a not so sophisticated device. So we were able to chip it off and look at her call detail records. And after the incident, there's some video from the school that shows her texting, but there's no text left because she texts so much and got over it. Looking at the call detail records, we see all of these other people that she talks to.
Mm-hmm.
How often have you gone, beyond the suspect and the victim's phone and into other folks' phone, and how successful were you at getting access to those devices?
That's a couple of really good thoughts strung together. The first is a lot of the vendors here would tell you that's why link analysis is so good, and you need to work on that. But the real question is getting that information, and that goes back to what we're talking about, the hurdles, because hurdles that may not normally exist in an adult investigation, you just subpoena it, you just ask for it. But again, now you're talking about not only whether the parents allow it and the privacy questions, but again, schools of all things can be the biggest hindrance to investigations. And a lot of times it may be that they don't want that can of worms. You may have a school refuse sometimes to give you either access to or information about a suspect or to help you find a suspect. But
and on the 3 devices we've done in the case so far, every one of them has had naked selfies and pictures of other kids naked.
mm-hmm.
And of course, we've got to report that. Parents are just livid.
Well, and the problem with that too, a part of that law of unintended consequences, let's say you've got the stereotypical teenage girl who is sexting with a stereotypical teenage boy. The parents of the girl find out about it and may just completely lose their mind. And so first of all, they want to press charges against the other child, get them kicked out of school. And all of a sudden you've got, when I talk about unintended consequences, these things kind of grow legs. And all of a sudden, you've got some 16, 17-year-old boy who is at risk of being on a sex offender registry and expelled from school because of behavior that this new digital mind grew up as a part of the culture. And that's something else that we kind of have to take into account, is that we're still applying our old school standards to something, and whether it's right or wrong or not, but it's something they grew up with, and it's just a part of their expression. And again, that's the concern, is that as these investigations start cascading, you have overzealous or upset parents and stuff like that.
I want to add one thing. I work with.
Yes, this is Jessica Coach. She's one of our technicians.
One of the things that I like to always tell my parents that I'm dealing with and the attorneys is, your minor child does not have a right to digital privacy. You're to have all the passwords. You're supposed to know what all the apps are. You want all the passwords to everything. At any time, you're allowed to check up on everything. Let me see your phone. Should be a common occurrence in your household, and this is advice that I would hope you would give the parents that you're working with as well, because if they start out with the expectation that anything I'm doing on this phone, anything I'm doing on this computer, mom or dad is going to see it, you're starting out at a place where they don't freak out when you do need to look at their stuff. And there's always an expectation that you know what's going on.
Well, and what Jessica said is absolutely right. And part of what we're trying to stress is that if you start early enough with they're understanding that all of their technological footprint is subject to review, but you can't push too hard. So there has to be this push for knowing what's going on, but yet, like we talked about that World War II spy, you have to be kind of careful that you don't push too far, because again, back when kids did use Facebook, we used to tell parents, if you see your kid's Facebook page and there's not much on there, or they don't have a lot of friends, you're not looking at the real Facebook page. Because they're going to have another Facebook page, but of course now that's called Instagram and Tumblr and all that other stuff. So, anyway, any other questions? Oh, our company, we're Ellington Digital Forensics. You can find us at ellington.net. Again, if you have any questions or access to Roxanne to ask her questions, she's Roxanne at ellington.net. But again, email us, connect with us, any questions, anything we can do to help you guys and stuff like that. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.